Chapter 1: The Doomsday Scenario and the Fragility of Voice. Welcome to Synapse Daily. To understand 1971, we must first understand fear. In the early 1960s, the American dream was shadowed by a mushroom cloud. The geopolitical landscape was a hair-trigger stalemate between two superpowers. At the heart of this tension lay a fatal flaw: the telephone. Back then, the national communication system was a circuit-switched network. It was a fragile web of copper wires and physical switchboards. If you wanted to call from DC to Los Angeles, a series of physical connections had to stay intact. One Soviet missile hitting a major switching hub in Kansas could effectively silence the entire United States military. The president would be shouting into a deadline while the world burned. The Rand Corporation's Paul Barron was the first to vocalize this nightmare. He realized that a centralized command was a target. He proposed something radical: a distributed network. Imagine a fishnet. If you cut one strand, the net still holds. This wasn't about technology yet, it was about survival. Barron's vision of a network without a heart, a system where every node was equal, was the terrifyingly logical response to the threat of total annihilation. This was the dark soil in which the seeds of the Internet were planted. Chapter 2: Licklider's Prophecy, the Intergalactic Dream. While the military focused on survival, a man named J.C.R. Licklider focused on the soul of the machine. Licklider was a psychologist and a visionary at MIT. In 1960, he published Man-Computer Symbiosis. He didn't see computers as mere number crunchers. He saw them as extensions of human thought. Licklider famously wrote a memo addressed to the members and affiliates of the Intergalactic Computer Network. People laughed at the title. But Licklider was serious. He imagined a world where anyone, anywhere, could tap into a global library of knowledge. He moved to ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, and created the Information Processing Techniques Office, IPTO. He didn't build the wires. He built the culture. He funded the most brilliant rebels at UCLA, Stanford, and MIT. He gave them the resources to think about time-sharing and remote access. Licklider realized that for computers to be truly useful, they had to talk to each other. He shifted the focus from missile defense to human connection. By the time he left ARPA, he had handpicked the disciples who would eventually build the ARPANET. He was the architect of the dream that 1971 would finally realize. Chapter 3: The Laboratory of Coincidence, 1969 to 1970. Before the explosion of 1971, there was the struggle of 1969. At UCLA, a young professor named Leonard Kleinrock was testing the mathematical theories of packet switching. His lab became Node 1. The goal was simple: send data from UCLA to the Stanford Research Institute, SRI. On October 29, 1969, history was made by accident. The researchers tried to type login. They typed the L. It arrived at Stanford. They typed the O. It arrived. When they typed the G, the system crashed. The first message ever sent on the Precursor to the Internet was simply "LO." It was unintentional, but poetic. Throughout 1970, the team worked in the trenches. They weren't just fixing bugs, they were inventing the very concept of a network operating system. They had to deal with varying voltages, different computer architectures, and massive physical distances. By the end of 1970, the network had grown to 4 nodes. It was a toddler learning to walk. But as the calendar turned to 1971, the toddler was about to start running. The foundation was set, the theories were proven, and the hardware was ready for a continental leap. Chapter 4: The Hardware of Freedom, the BBN Wizards. In 1971, the physical reality of the Internet was a box. Not a sleek router, but a massive, steel-clad machine called the IMP, the Interface Message Processor. These were built by a small think-and-do tank in Cambridge called BBN Technologies. The team at BBN were known as the Wizards. Led by Frank Hart and Dave Walden, they took a Honeywell DDP-516 computer and stripped it down. They ruggedized it. They made it capable of handling the brutal task of packet switching in real time. This machine was the world's first true router. It had to be separate from the host computer because mainframes were too busy calculating to worry about moving data. In 1971, BBN began shipping these refrigerators across the country. Every time an IMP arrived at a new university or military site, the ARPANET's brain grew. These machines were designed to be always on. They had no power switches. If one failed, the others would automatically reroute the traffic. This was the realization of Paul Barron's fishnet dream. The IMPs were the silent, unblinking sentinels of the new digital age. They weren't just hardware, they were the physical borders of a new country called cyberspace. Chapter 5: The Accidental Masterpiece, Ray Tomlinson's AT. By late 1971, the ARPANET was a technical marvel. But it was cold. It was a system for machines to share files. It lacked a human voice. That changed in a quiet office at BBN in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Ray Tomlinson was a quiet engineer. He wasn't trying to change the world. He was just looking for a way to make his job easier. He had two programs. One was SNDMSG, which allowed users on the same computer to leave notes. The other was ARPANET, which sent files between computers. Ray had a what-if moment. What if he combined them? He needed a way to address a specific person on a specific computer. He looked down at his Model 33 teletype keyboard. He needed a character that was rarely used. It couldn't be a letter or a number. He saw that symbol. At the time, it was an obscure accounting mark. It meant at the price of. Ray repurposed it. User at host. It was elegant. It was logical. The first email was sent across the room between two machines. Ray didn't even remember the content. He told a colleague, "Don't tell anyone. This isn't what we're supposed to be working on." But he couldn't stop it. By the end of 1971, email became the killer app. The military's survival network had been hijacked by human gossip. The digital identity was born. We were no longer just users. We had addresses in a new world. Chapter 6: The Protocol Wars, Architects of the Unseen. As the network hit 23 hosts in 1971, the language of the machine became a battlefield. This was the era of the Network Control Program, or NCP. It was the first common tongue of the ARPANET. But it was flawed. It was built for a small, trusted group. It assumed every packet would arrive perfectly. The engineers in 1971 began to realize a terrifying truth. If the network grew to thousands of nodes, NCP would collapse. The protocol wars were fought on whiteboards in Stanford and UCLA. This wasn't just about code. It was about philosophy. Should the network be smart? Or should it be dumb? Visionaries like Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn began to argue for end-to-end reliability. They wanted the intelligence at the edges of the network, not in the center. They were designing a system that could handle failure. They wanted a protocol that could connect different types of networks together. This was the conceptual birth of TCP/IP. In 1971, these men were writing the laws of digital physics. They weren't just connecting computers. They were ensuring that no single government or company could ever turn off the flow of information. They were building a floodgate that could never be fully closed. Chapter 7: The Cultural Schism, Suits versus Sandals. The ARPANET of 1971 was a paradox. It was funded by the Pentagon, the heart of the military-industrial complex. But it was built by researchers who listened to rock and roll and protested the Vietnam War. This was the suits versus sandals era. The Pentagon wanted a rigid, secure command system. The professors wanted a free, open library. This tension created the request for comments, RFC, culture. Instead of top-down mandates, the ARPANET was built through discussion. Steve Crocker wrote the first RFC on a notepad in a bathroom to avoid waking his roommates. This established a radical precedent: the internet would be a meritocracy of ideas. In 1971, this culture of openness won. The military allowed the academics to experiment. They realized that the chaos of the researchers was producing better results than a rigid military hierarchy. This is why the internet isn't a proprietary product like a car or a phone. It is a shared resource. The DNA of 1971 is the reason why a kid in a basement today has the same access to the network as a billionaire. The Sandals gave us a network that prioritized freedom over control. Chapter 8, The Virtual Frontier, The First Digital Citizens. What was it like to live inside the ARPANET in 1971? It was a world of glowing phosphor. It was the terminal IMP or tip era. Before the tip, you needed a massive mainframe to get online. In 1971, the tip allowed researchers to connect using simple, dumb terminals. It lowered the barrier to entry. The first hacker communities began to emerge. These weren't criminals. They were explorers. They would stay up until 4 a.m., fueled by caffeine and the thrill of remote access. They discovered that they could chat in real time. They created the first online slang. They even conducted the first e-commerce transaction, a small deal for some cannabis between students at Stanford and MIT. These 1971 pioneers were the first people to experience cyborg consciousness. They felt their minds extend across the copper wires. They realized that distance was becoming an illusion. If you could see a file on a machine in Boston while sitting in Palo Alto, were you really there? This psychological shift was the most profound change of 1971. The world was shrinking. The digital frontier was being settled by a few hundred people who knew that the world would never be the same again. Chapter 8, The Virtual Frontier, Sensory Dislocation. What did the internet feel like in 1971? It wasn't a sleek glass screen. It was mechanical. It was tactile. It was loud. Imagine sitting in a cramped room at Stanford. The only light comes from a green phosphor screen. You hear the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of an ASR-33 teletype. The air smells like machine oil and hot electronics. In 1971, you didn't just go online. You entered a state of being. The engineers call it telepresence. You are physically in California. But your mind is working in Massachusetts. You are manipulating files 3,000 miles away. This was the first time in history that human consciousness was divorced from geography. Have you ever felt phantom vibration from your phone? The pioneers of 71 felt something similar. They felt the lag. They felt the heartbeat of the IMPs. They were the first to experience network latency. When the machine hesitated, they felt a physical tension. They were learning to live in two places at once. This was the true frontier. No maps. No laws. Just raw data flowing through copper veins. They weren't just users, they were the first immigrants to the digital world. Chapter 9, The Original Sin, The Architecture of Trust. We need to talk about a ghost. It is a ghost that haunts your bank account today. It is the ghost of the original sin. In 1971, the ARPANET was built on a foundation of absolute, radical trust. Why was it so insecure? Because the designers were colleagues. They were friends. They were a small tribe of elite scientists. They never imagined a world of billion-dollar ransomware. They never envisioned phishing or identity theft. To them, the network was a private library. You didn't lock the doors of a library when your friends were inside. In 1971, security was seen as a barrier to progress. If you wanted to access a remote computer, you often didn't even need a password. You just needed to know the host name. The protocols were open. They were honest. This 1971 mindset is why we struggle today. We are trying to build fortresses on top of a 55-year-old handshake. We are using a system designed for gentlemen to fight a war against shadows. Was this trust a mistake? Or was it the only way the internet could have grown so fast? The original sin of 1971 is the price we pay for our current connectivity. Chapter 10, The Great Expansion, The Jagged Lightning Bolt. By mid-1971, the ARPANET wasn't just a few dots on a map. It was a jagged lightning bolt stretching across the American landscape. The network had grown to 15 nodes. This expansion was a logistical nightmare. Every new node meant a new IMP. It meant more leased phone lines from AT&T. These weren't standard lines, they were high-speed 50 kbps circuits. At the time, that was lightning fast. To the average person, it was incomprehensible. Look at the nodes of 71. NASA Ames. Case Western Reserve. Carnegie Mellon. The MITRE Corporation. Each node added a different flavor to the net. NASA brought computational power. MIT brought artificial intelligence. The network was becoming a metacomputer. It was a hive mind in its infancy. During this expansion, the first network map became a sacred document. It showed the physical reality of the virtual world. If you look at that 1971 map today, it looks like a constellation. Each line represents thousands of hours of labor. Each dot represents a breakthrough in human thought. The geography of the United States was being rewritten. The flyover states were no longer empty, they were the transit points for the world's most valuable ideas. Chapter 11, The Technical Debt, Building the Eternal Foundation. In 1971, the engineers made choices. Some were brilliant. Some were good enough for now. In engineering, we call this technical debt. It is the interest we pay on the shortcuts of the past. Take the concept of the packet. In 1971, the size and structure of a packet were finalized. This was the DNA of the data. But the address space was small. They thought, who would ever need more than a few hundred host addresses? This was the seed of the IPv4 crisis we faced decades later. They were building a sidewalk for a village. They didn't realize they were laying the foundation for a megacity of 8 billion people. Every time your Wi-Fi drops, you are touching the technical debt of 1971. Every time a packet is lost in transit, you are experiencing the limits of the NCP protocol. But here is the miracle, it still works. The fundamental logic of 1971 was so robust that it survived the transition to the modern web. We are flying in a supersonic jet that still uses the rivets of a 1971 propeller plane. These engineers weren't just building for their time, they were accidentally building for eternity. They were the master masons of a digital cathedral they would never see finished. Chapter 12, The Collision of Networks, The Birth of Internetworking. By the end of 1971, ARPANET was a success, but it was an island. In Hawaii, researchers were building ARPANET, a radio-based network. In the UK, the NPL network was experimenting with different packet structures. The world was suddenly full of digital islands. The problem was that they couldn't talk to each other. An ARPANET packet couldn't understand an ARPANET packet. This was the next great hurdle, internetworking. In late 1971, the realization hit, we don't need one network to rule them all. We need a meta-language that allows any network to talk to any other network. This was the conceptual spark for the internet. The prefix inter- means between. We weren't just building a network anymore, we were building the space between networks. The engineers began to envision a gateway. Think of it as a universal translator. This shifted the focus from hardware to software. They realized that the internet wasn't a set of wires, it was a set of agreements. It was a treaty signed in code. This decision to keep the network agnostic, meaning it didn't care if the data traveled via satellite, radio, or copper, is why the internet survived the transition from phone lines to fiber optics and 5G. In 1971, they built a ghost that could inhabit any machine. Chapter 13, The Living Ghosts, The Human Legacy and the Pandora's Box. The men and women of 1971, the serfs, the cons, the Lundy researchers, were mostly in their 20s and 30s. They were young, brilliant, and arguably naive. They believed that by connecting the world, they would end misunderstanding. They thought that if everyone had access to the same information, truth would prevail. They didn't see the trolls. They didn't see the algorithmic echo chambers. They didn't see the surveillance capitalism that would eventually dominate their creation. There is a bittersweet quality to the legacy of 1971. In interviews, many of the original pioneers express a sense of wonder, but also a sense of caution. They created a synapse, a connection point. But a synapse doesn't choose what signal it carries. It carries the cure for cancer research just as easily as it carries a virus. In 1971, they opened a Pandora's box. But inside that box, beneath all the chaos of the modern web, there was still hope. The hope that a connected humanity is better than a fragmented one. The engineers of 1971 gave us the tool, it was up to us to decide how to use it. They provided the nervous system, we provided the soul. Chapter 14, The 2026 Perspective, From ARPANET to the Singularity. Here we are. It is 2026. The ARPANET of 1971 is 55 years old. The speed of the 1971 network, 50 kilobits per second, is now millions of times slower than the device in your pocket. But the synapse has never been more vital. Today, we are moving toward a world of ambient computing. The network is no longer something you log into, it is the air we breathe. We are seeing the rise of neural interfaces and quantum networking. But all of it, every single bit of it, still follows the packet logic established in 1971. We have come full circle. We started with a fear of nuclear silence, and we have reached a world of infinite noise. The challenge for us in 2026 is to remember the lessons of 1971. The network is only as good as the trust we put into it. It was built as a galactic network for the benefit of all. As we close this journey on Synapse Daily, look at your screen. Look at the wires in your walls. You aren't just looking at tech. You are looking at the fossilized dreams of 1971. You are part of the intergalactic network now. Make it count. Rises to a crescendo, then shifts to a soft, lingering electronic hum. Thank you for staying with us through this epic 14-chapter journey. We have covered the bombs, the dreams, the it symbol, and the very foundation of our modern lives. This has been a Synapse Daily Deep Dive. Like this video if you learned something new. Comment your thoughts below. Was 1971 the most important year in human history? And subscribe for more fascinating stories that connect the past to our digital future. This is Synapse Daily, signing off. Keep exploring, keep connecting.